Well, good evening. We are going to go ahead and get started our work session, and welcome to our people that are in the audience as well as those that may be live streaming. This is a work session, and this is a different format for our board to just get off the dais and actually have a chance just to have some informal interactions and conversations, and also a chance for us to get more information as we work on the charter school renewal process. So we're looking forward to that. I just want to acknowledge that all board members are here with the exception of Director Long, who may be on his way or he may be in bed. We know he was not feeling well last Thursday, so have not heard from him, but everybody else is present. Around the table, we have Dr. Tucker, our superintendent, Ted Knight, assistant superintendent, Matt Reynolds, chief assessment officer, Danny Windsor, chief of the choice programming office, and Kristen Schmidt, assistant, and Laura Gorman as well. And then we also have Mary Clemish, our general counsel for the school district. So today, really, I kind of thinking we'll do kind of three stages to our conversation, Danny. And one is just things that maybe, there he is. Director Long has now arrived. There's a place down here for you, sir. How you feeling? Still crappy? We're sorry to hear that. You said that on live stream, by the way. All right. So I thought we'd do. I would break it up in a couple stages. One is those questions that are more general about the renewal process that applies to all our charter schools that have made this request to renew their charter, and then the next stage would be if there's information on any of the four charters that we're still gathering. And Danny, certainly, you can certainly state if it's not available yet, or if we're still working on information. That's certainly an acceptable response. But I know there were a few questions we asked Thursday night that we wanted to have some more information about. We've also on the agenda is an executive session for us to ponder as well, and really that is just for the purpose of us really making sure that we're staying within our parameters of the renewal process. So if the board chooses, we can actually do that from a work session if we choose to go into executive session for that purpose. It would be to seek counsel from Mary Clemish and also our outside counsel, Kristen Edgar, should we need it, just to make sure, again, that our legal parameters are very clear to us as we move forward. Again, as we talked about Thursday, the actual approval of these charter renewal requests will not happen until January 8th. And so this is, again, just a process for us to gather more information. And certainly from this forum, we typically do not make decisions. So it really is just a chance for us to talk with each other in an informal setting. With that, so that's the structure, general and specific, and then executive session if the board votes to do that. Or does that meet your needs, directors? Does that seem like that's a good framework? Seeing head nods, we're looking good. All right, so I think with that, we'll start with just those general kind of questions. And I know one of the things that came up, Danny, was just around waivers in terms of where that fits in with the renewal process. And by the way, I have looked at my handy dandy book that you created for us several times. Thank you. But I think one of the questions was, when we're in the renewal process, are waivers, do we start all over again with considering waivers? And then will that be part of the application? I know at times we've had applications approved and then the waiver conversation comes later. So just some information about where that fits in the process.
Good question. I think it was probably closer to midnight, and I briefly mentioned that on our last one. Waivers can follow this process well. Part of the reason why we had paused a little bit on the waivers was about looking at our CASB policies, looking at CASB in relationship to our current policies. So rather than having our charters write waivers on our current policies, our hope was to ensure to look at the policies that would be in place probably for the next steps of the renewal. If it was a term of a contract from 1 to 5 years, we just want to make sure the waivers that they are requesting are directly related to our policies. And so we put them on pause right now until we are able to identify those particular policies. So when we do talk about waivers, it directly connects to what that looks like as well. So we're not in limbo of trying to interpret what waiver means in relationship to this policy.
So a standard condition we might want is just that the waiver conversation, the waivers be initiated at such a time when we've had our policies updated and reviewed. Is that okay? So that's what. So Director Lemieux's wondering, but I think that would be part of the resolution when we. Yeah, so we put a condition on each resolution that says waivers will be considered at a later time once our policies are updated and reviewed. What other general questions, directors, do you have that impact, like I said, the whole renewal process or all four chartered and renewal requests?
So my question is, we're offering a certain amount of time for the renewals, 3-year, 5-year renewal. Are we all caught up in our changes in our choice programming department that you feel comfortable giving a full 5-year? Is it going to be fair who's going through this process right now to people 2-3 years down the line? Or should we just do a 2-year renewal for all 4 of these?
I think it's a very good question. I think as we look at what our practice looks like, not only within our department, but also within the state as well too. That standard contract language would be around a 5-year renewal within the state. And so that's kind of a common practice that you see across multiple districts that are there. I think as we're continuing to look at developing performance frameworks as a collective group that's there, we actually can put conditional renewals. That's a part of the process that we're working on right now. The language in which we would provide that staff recommendation was looking at those specific things around, do they meet these particular standards around academic performance, governance, and financial health? With that being said, we have the flexibility within our state to offer those conditional renewals, and so if we felt like it wasn't at that 5-year that we wanted to recommend, we would put it in that language in that staff recommendation if it was less than. So it was something we were mindful of in looking at as far as the staff renewal that was there, was anything from that 1 to 5 years. And so with that in consideration to some of the benchmark standards that are out there from a national level as well as the state level, those were considerations that we had looked at where we feel like we had the ability and the information within our department to be able to make that recommendation.
So I'm asking this because it may transition us into more specific. So if anybody else has general. But my general, and I kind of stated it at the last meeting, was just for all of our renewals, looking at safety and security. And I'm assuming that kind of comes under academic achievement and governance. And so just kind of the status of where we're at with all of those eventually. But generally, it's just kind of a question about how are we looking at that, safety and security.
And I failed to say earlier that really is the board's focus are threefold. One is academic performance, one is governance, and one is financial solvency. So that's really what we're honed in on. But I think Krista's right. We've talked before about the whole notion of security in terms of whether all our schools have that certified emergency response in place. And so I think that's the question: is are we compliant with that? And then Kevin, after that.
You can definitely see the interaction between safety, I think, in a number of those areas, even from financials and how you're allocating resources to governance to also look at the academic performance side of things. How we call that out specifically in the charter renewal application is something that is definitely a next step that I think we can really highlight more specifically and pull that language out where it's a lot more visible rather than it being something we have to interpret within it. We have had an opportunity to talk with our Director of Safety and Security and Rich Payne in particular, where how do we build him into that process? The one thing I want to be able to reassure, just like all of our other 70 neighborhood schools, is all of our charters have the same access to our Director of Security as well too, around utilizing them for resources, trainings where they have to stay in compliance, just like any of our schools do as well, to ensure that Staff are in compliance with what that looks like, but also all of our charter schools, even from a facility standpoint, is that next step that I think we can start building into the application where we call it out more specifically, rather than something that is we're pulling out, I think, specifically from that. And so there are some things we could potentially pull out from it, but when I talk about with great confidence and what that looks like, I think that's a clear next step that I made note after our conversation on Thursday. Yeah, it's a part of the required purchase services that are built into the contract, yes. You guys want to add to that? Director Long? Okay.
I was just curious about the waiver. When we renew a charter school, are we going to look at the waiver that we give to them? Are we going to re-examine them on each renewal, or are we going to have a standard template from now on? So we can look at overall waiver that we should grant to all the charter school, and then we deal with individual charter renewal. Did that make sense? Oh, okay.
And let me see if I've got it, Kevin. We agreed that that should be a condition that we add on to a renewal resolution, is that waivers will have to be done later. Reason being is because we know we're going through the overhaul project of all our waivers starting in January, and so Danny feels like it'd be more fair for us to wait until that project's done, so they're asking for waivers from current policies rather than our old policies. So a condition of renewal would be that they would submit their waivers once that project is completed. Does that satisfy the question for you?
So I just not quite sure how the law do. So when we are doing that, does it mean that all the previous waiver that we grant is going to continue until we visit them in a later time? Because when you renew a contract, you have to, you cannot just say that. So you have to know, they have to know, the charter need to know also what waivers is in place, for them.
I don't know if you want to address that, Mary. So the question really is, do the current waivers stay intact until such time those new ones can be presented?
And I think this is probably the type of topic that is best addressed in our executive session so that we can talk about the legal issues surrounding the waivers or the legal questions with both Kristen and I. So we could reserve that because there would be a legal question for us to respond to in that regard.
Other general higher questions that just impact this renewal process? Anything else that you're wondering about, directors? So I think our next step really then is to move into more specifics. And I know that we have all had a chance to read the staff's recommendations regarding these renewal requests. And so I'd like us to focus on that and really respond to the staff's recommendations. If we need clarification, if we have questions about how they came to those conclusions, and then if there were any questions that we wanted to answer from the dais on Thursday night. So with that, so I'll just kind of go methodically with, I think our first charter that we looked at was Ben Franklin, if I'm, is that right? Yes.
Just a simple question. Where are the staff recommendations? They're not visible right now.
So there's two places. One, I sent you guys an email on Saturday, so that just linked staff's recommendations. And then the other place is that when Danny sent us a memo, he hyperlinked those as well for each of those charters. And they're also on our agenda from the 13th. Do you see those, Director Graziano? The other thing, if you want just to go, if you look for an email from me, I just published those 4 links for you guys separately too, if that's easier to find. So Ben Franklin was our You guys good? All right. So Ben Franklin was the first school on the agenda on Thursday night. Any questions regarding how staff came to the conclusion they did regarding their recommendations, or anything else that you wanted clarification on? Seeing none. There was on the data you gave us, Danny. There was just one place where they were approved as performance plan, low participation. Is that of a concern to us at all, or?
So is that specifically regarding the participation? For the. No, the participation rate is something that's allowable by state law. So they allow parents to excuse as long as they're capturing the parent excusals appropriately and their performance plan type remains in the green category, then they're okay.
Yeah. Any other specific needs for Ben Franklin in terms of staff's recommendations? Anything else that you're wondering? Okay, we'll move on to Hope Online Learning Academy. And again, referencing staff's recommendation. Danny, maybe you could talk. I know staff's recommendation was a conditional renewal for 2 years, and maybe if you just give us a little bit of rationale behind that.
So on this staff recommendation, we've had the opportunity to work directly with Hope Online's leadership, and the opportunity to, one, evaluate the previous pathways plan, as well as look at the previous unified improvement plan as well, and really look at this process kind of over not only kind of a year length window, look at this over a 5-year kind of window as well too. And so as we kind of pieced through and started looking at some of the plan, we wanted to see if there were any common trends, common themes that we were seeing as well. And even the site visit renewal as well, to have them take that same lens that was there. From our site visit reviewer, one of the parts that I did want to be able to highlight, didn't have a chance to highlight last Thursday, was actually our site viewer looked at it from a 5-year process. I know there's a comment that was made in particular around kind of that 5-year window that was there. One of the contexts I wanted to also provide is when you talked to the reviewer, he said if you had to look at it from a 5-year standpoint, his review was spot on. If you had to look at it from a 2-year standpoint, there has been significant growth, is the one thing that came from that site reviewer as well, that was highlighted. And so that was something from a third party that you could see some significant system changes that were occurring, that he felt like he saw that were having an impact, I think, on Hope. The part that we wanted to continue to look at was, one, I even had the opportunity to meet with the academic cabinet team over at Hope as well too, and discuss some focus things, anywhere from curriculum to systems performance and some of the programs that are there. The part I really wanted to provide some guidance on even tonight is this idea of accountability versus autonomy, I think, are the two things you really think about when you think about charter schools that are there. And one of the things that we talked a lot about is if we saw from an accountability standpoint that from a school performance, academic performance, we weren't seeing that same growth, how could we then come in and support as an authorizer and support our charters in that process? And it's been a really good partnership that we've had. And so some of the feedback that was built in there was built upon the pillars that Hope was grounded upon, as well as some of the tenets anywhere from social learning theory to some of their academic performance structures. So we took a really big deep dive into the data that was there to really look at performance trends that were there. Laura Gorman's been doing this work for probably 7 years with Hope as well, and has been an expert and has been a partner in this process, where she actually was looking at the quarterly reviews that I know that Director Lung was talking about previously, that was there. And so we've kind of tried to build this in as a team approach, where we worked even with Matt's office as well too, our special education office, to really get some focused feedback on that. So the conditions in which we had put there, because I think of some different metrics such as the number of new students that were enrolling in Hope on a regular basis. This past year, 32% of students who enrolled into Hope were new to Hope as well. And so when you look at this idea of high transient components, what were those things that you could ensure that mentors were prepared from Director Shore, Chancho Shore's comment on the professional development plan? What were some of those focused areas that were there that we spent a lot of time talking? So in taking all that into consideration and our responsibility as an authorizer to support Hope in a differentiated way because of the pathway plan that was there, we wrote some really focused conditions to look at things such as look at their cohort models. How are students doing over a period of time? New students, existing students, how do we get that broken down by learning center in particular? And then how do we then ensure that our students are performing at the levels that we were? Goes back to Director Lung's point of how long are we really going to look at this piece? And so that's why we built in some specific language in the conditional renewal that was there around tracking cohort piece, tying it in specifically to student performance. If they didn't meet particular conditions that were there, staff recommendation of potentially non-renewal would occur if they didn't meet those particular standards. We're all built into those conditions, while ensuring that we have some good systems in place to ensure that we're supporting our charter schools.
Thanks, Danny. And also, Danny, I meant to say this earlier, but you're going to be our gatekeeper in terms of if you feel like you need to phone a friend or bring other people to the table. Just know that that's certainly acceptable. Otherwise, we're going to assume that we're an inclusive forum right now, but feel free to bring anybody to the table that you think needs to help us with our conversation. One of the things I'm wondering about, we had Extended Hope Online for 1 year, almost a year ago. I think it was February. And I'm wondering if there were a couple of conditions, and I think before we look at the renewal for another extension, that we want to make sure those conditions were met. And I'm just looking through really quickly, skimming through, but a couple things that we stated. One is that there needed to be compliance with CRS 2232-109, which I believe is the Safe School Plan that we kind of discussed a little bit earlier. And then there was also a condition that Hope have some conversation with CSI regarding the possibility of looking at a different authorizer if appropriate. So I'm wondering if those two conditions have been met from our previous approval of an extension.
As far as referring specifically to CSI in relationship to reaching out that was there, those are conversations that I did not have directly initially when this plan was put out there in particular. As far as looking at a Safe Schools Act and to be able to put some context, there are a lot of process components that were established in this conditions, but the idea of looking at implementation is a different story. And so I guess the part that I would talk a little bit about with some of these conditions is, can we verify that these processes have been established? The processes have been established. The idea of the implementation of what that looks like and what those practices are is the next step. And I think it goes back to some of the different accountability structures that we wanted to build in the pathway plans that were there. I think the big shift was trying to say, not only do you want just to establish the process, how do you measure the impact of what you're doing? And I think what we were hoping to do, when you look at some of the conditions we're putting in there, were really around impact data rather than looking at process data. And so when I would refer to some of these conditions, and I hope this comes across in the most articulate way, is we can definitely check some of the boxes off in the process that was there. But I think when we write conditions, we don't want to make it just about the process of the steps of completing it. It needs to be about the impact that it's going to have in particular. And that's where the partnership, I think, between Hope, I think, and us as a district, we're trying to reshape what that looks on looking at impact data rather than just looking at process data. So that's the part that I'd like to provide some conditions to. Do you need to add? Yeah, that'd be great.
So I can help you with the answer to CSI. My understanding from previous to Danny's time is that some conversations were had with CSI, just in a more informal process about their interest and potential of that. And CSI, is my understanding, does not currently have any multi-district online schools and was not at that time interested in seeking to add more schools to their plate. They have quite a few, and in particular, looking at multi-district online. So that's kind of as far as that went, and some of that was with Danny's predecessor, and some of that was, I believe, conversations with Hope as well, between Hope and CSI.
Yes. They checked the box yes of it. The part 2 piece was saying not only it wasn't just about doing it, did it have the impact that it was intended is the part 2 piece. So I want to make sure we get to that next part of not just did you do the check mark of what it was said, did it have the intended impact that was there? Correct. Yeah. Thanks.
I have sent you a few questions related to Hope's renewal. I think in particular, one that I don't think has been answered is related to they have divided itself into 3 different schools: high, middle, and elementary. My specific question is, are we required to authorize all 12 grade that they have? Well, knowing about Hope's, their elementary school is in their 8th years of not reaching the performance that they supposed, to be. There is no requirement. My question to you is there a requirement for us to renew every single grade? Because it strikes me as odd that if we can refocus the effort to the successful part and make it better and drop the part that is consistently failing, that is probably helping everybody in order to focus. Instead of having 3,000 students, why there's no reason why we need to keep all the grade and keep all 3,000 students, right? If having 1,800 students will make a better use of the administration's resources, their time and effort, I don't think, the questions of mine is being answered. Knowing about that 89% of the students are minority, and it is important to keep in mind that students with at risk background probably need a little more attentions to be able to be successful, to help them. So, and I cannot explain to my constituents that why we are keeping a school that's in 8 years of failing, and the last 3 years, the score is pretty much static around 36 to 38. That means that every single year we're failing a lot of students, on their elementary school. And I just want to understand, and also why are we putting a 2 years renewal instead of having 1 year, so that we can monitor their progress every single years. I mean, why 2 years?
So really there's, I think, about 3 questions, Kevin. Let me make sure I capture. One is, can we recommend renewal for 2 of the levels, like the middle school and the high school, and not elementary? It was one of your questions, and because of your concern of the history of the elementary. You also were wondering about how can we justify the confidence in the performance in terms of, as you see it, it looks static to you. And there was a 3rd question that all of a sudden did you get? And why 2 years instead of 1 year?
I think they're all very good questions, some very similar questions in the renewal process that I think we were asking as well too. As far as their establishment, kind of going to the first question, being that there are 3 separate school codes that are attached to the elementary, middle, and the high that are there. In particular, Hope is organized as a K-12 organization. And so there's 2 parts really that's to this. Theoretically, in the sense of the state looking at 3 separate entities, could you potentially look at it and do a non-renewal for one particular area. Yes, but the condition is this, is it's a K-12 piece, the way it's established as a site, you really couldn't because of how they operate Hope as an organization. And so it's not just as easy just to be able to pull it out because of how resources are allocated, leadership is allocated, that it would be a fundamental aspect of kind of deconstructing a whole organization to see if it would even be possible to run that just with a kind of a 612 programming that would be there. And so there's a whole nother layer to that. So I don't mean to be vague. So there is a fundamental component of yes, but realistically in how it's organized as a organization for their functionality, that is something that would, and I would defer to Heather, I think, in that aspect. But in our conversations, it wouldn't be something fundamentally that you could pull out the K-5 and they'd be able to continue to function as is, if that's fair to say, Heather. Okay. The other aspect of looking at the idea of why is it static and why have we seen it falter out, I think it goes back to the question of why do we not have a regular identified areas of data we're looking at to progress monitor how students are doing, but more importantly, it goes back to the part two of is if we know that information, what are we doing about it? And that goes back to how are you training mentors, how are you developing a professional development plan to have that direct impact that was there. In my opinion, what was glaringly missing, in my opinion, around that is that aspect in particular, in which I know is a goal that Hope has built in there in particular, is it can't just be about saying curriculum is available and not training mentors and teachers to know how to support students in particular growth. It's great that you can have all the data that's there, but if you have no idea what to do with it and can't help you with reteaching, then there's a concern that was there. The idea of looking at 2 years was really trying to make sure we looked at the alignment between the Unified Improvement Plan, Pathway Plan, and then how we can support them through a contract and as an authorizer. So the reason why we looked at the 2 years, and we can't go back in time, and so I'm going to try to continue to move forward. I think in time that's there for us to be able to continue to successfully support as an authorizer and charter that was there. It would allow us that ability to see through that pathways plan and work in conjunction with the Colorado Department of Education and their feedback in particular around the pathway plan as well. This is no longer just a Douglas County School District recommendation. This is a Colorado Department of Education conversation and a Douglas County School District conversation. So that 2-year process will allow us to see through what the Colorado Department of Ed has been giving feedback on that pathways plan. So that's why we really looked at it as a 2-year window that we could see through that pathways plan and unified improvement plan.
So I have a couple of comments and question. Comment, we do have one measure of success or lack of success, but that's one measure when we look at state data. Other measures of success can be in parent data, teacher data, and formative assessment data. So I would encourage us or encourage in a 2-year plan to have other data that helps us look at the school in a more global, through a different lens than just state data through one assessment at the end of the year. The Pathways Plan and the Unified Improvement Plan are also sources of data because those help us to see where Hope has been and where Hope intends to go, as long as there are those checks of how are we doing along the way. So for me, it isn't a total representation of how a school is doing by looking at one form of data. And to say that that is the data, I get it, I understand where we're going with all of it, but I think we should also consider the opportunity too when we're talking about this is we've listened to parents, we've listened to children, we've seen Hope's graduation. Those are also forms of data that we have to consider in making this decision.
Mr. Windsor talked a little bit about this being a response to Hope's request for renewal, both at the district level as well as at the state level. and I want to make sure that I have the correct document. This document that I have is dated May 24th, 2017, and it's probably what gives rise to a 2-year request. And this is from the State Board of Education. It's a proposed final written determination regarding Hope Online Learning Academy Elementary School and Hope Online Learning Academy Middle School in Douglas County. And it simply says, wherefore the State Board orders that Hope, pursuant to 2211-210-5A of the Colorado CRS, implement the district and schools pathways proposal. In the event that Hope fails to implement its pathways proposal as ordered, or in the event that Hope's elementary or middle school earns a rating of priority improvement or turnaround plan in 2019 or in subsequent years and fails to make adequate progress, then pursuant of 2211-210-5A CRS, the Commissioner shall again assign the State Review Panel to critically evaluate the school's performance, revisit its recommendations, and report back to the State Board. If both Hope Elementary and Middle Schools improve their school plan types to improvement plan or higher, this order will automatically terminate. And then on the same date, and Danny, please feel free to correct me, the state ordered in 2000, same month and date, that it talks about the root causes of the plan, and then in the contract on page 13, it states that the district does not see closure as a viable option. The State Review Panel also states it does not recommend closure because it serves a unique population of students whose needs cannot be met better elsewhere. Then it goes on to talent management and so forth. So it seems like they were given 2 years to raise this bar. Am I correct, Danny? And have we, because it mentions 2019, we're not into 19 yet, correct? So, and I'll ask you and Matt, where does that put Hope? And then I'm sure Hope will address that question as well.
That is correct, and that's where the timing piece comes into the renewal aspect of seeing that plan through in particular. And so as we were looking and evaluating the pathways plan, it became a mid-year to mid-year based off of our academic calendar that was there. So the idea of trying to look at the accountability aspects of how we supported and how Hope's performance was at different time frames of when the charter contract was extended for a year in relation to needing that additional 6 to 12 months potentially that was there to be able to monitor their growth as well. So that is correct in the sense of looking at it, of seeing it through the 2019, kind of that 1920 school year that was there. Matt, do you want to add anything or? Okay. Growth plan, we are currently working with CDE, and we're currently in the process of reviewing with CDE at this point in time to then review that impact of it. So we have not had the ability to finalize that plan. It is still in place, correct? Okay.
All right. I'm sorry, but I'm going to switch topics. So if anybody has a follow-up, maybe. Okay. So I'm going to just go back to the safety and security because the other issue you talked about, I understood, the checked box and the implementation, talking with CSI had been done. But in terms of the safety and security, when I look at the contract extension that we did, I think in February of 2018, that goes through, I think, the end of June, there were really specific things outlined for safety and security, and I'm happy to read them if you guys want, but I mean, they were so specific as to, I mean, this is just one example. It identified for each learning center the information we needed, like employer ID, tax IDs, certificates, fire inspections, lots of stuff on the list. And I was just wondering where we're at with that and if we have compliance. Sorry.
Yes. I'm sorry, no, so yes, all that information was provided as of March 1st of 2018, and then it was submitted again as of September 1st of 2018 for the contract. It's all resident in a Google Drive following the procedure for all Douglas County schools. So all of the safety and security information, the safety plans, the exit plans, and all the drills are included in that, as well as all the employee information. So again, it was provided on March 1st, and again as on September 1st, and it will be provided annually.
And just a follow up, so we've confirmed that information.
And that's the part that we will confirm that we have that document as well, and make sure you have a copy of it as well. I think that's a part 2 that we'll make sure you get that specifically to you, and if you want to share that out, we can share that as well. So the question that was there just for online purposes is, have we checked and has visited with Hope in particular to verify those things are in place? Is that correct? So that's the part I will go back and I'll make sure that we check and get that information back to you. Yes.
Mr. Windsor, how many centers, and I think that Director Lemieux is referring to, I'm pretty sure she's referring to each center. So each of the 23 centers.
So we'll verify as far as with the 23 that plan it is include and refer to each of the 23 learning centers that are there rather than just a general plan. Yep.
So I guess my question is, we've talked a lot about plans, different improvement options. We've seen scores of data provided by Dr. Reynolds, all great, and always hovering around the same point. So I guess to me, my question is, and I just know the world I live in, what is a vision of success if we've always been at, say, 38, 36, 38? In 2 years, if we having this conversation again, what is success? Is it 38 still? Is it 45? Is it 52? I mean, what does that equal to in your eyes? That's what I'm curious about.
And I think those are, again, good questions. I think the challenge in some of this work, specifically around the charter school kind of structure in particular, is as an authorizer, how do we provide that input in particular to our charter school and also ensure there's an accountability factor that's there, not only from academic performance, which I appreciate Director Chanchashore saying as well, is what are some of those additional areas in the sense of how does a student feel safe at the school? How are we looking at attendance? Are we looking at behavior issues, which are some pillars that are there as well too? And so when you look at some of the feedback and coaching feedback that was provided, I think to Hope, these were things that I would say would help from truly an academic standpoint as well as potentially from a safety standpoint as well. But really, I think what it comes down to is how do we ensure that we have students are getting a personalized learning opportunity that we would want to see in every one of our schools. And how are we ensuring that there's a curriculum that's aligned to allow that student to not only as far as to see where they currently are at or where they need to be able to go from not only an academic standpoint, but from a socio-emotional learning standpoint as well. How do we also ensure that families are an active part of this process, that there's a true family engagement process that's built into the social learning theory aspects? And those are things that we've established, I think, within it, but it also goes back to, I think, some mission and vision that I think Dr. Tucker can outline a little bit for our schools too.
Again, the mission and vision, all that work will take place with our strategic plan. And I certainly want to commend Mr. Windsor and Mrs. Gorman and other people in our choice department for putting together a rubric that will be used for each one of our charter schools relative to renewal.
That framework in particular, Director Graziano, I think is how do we ensure there's that transparency to talk about what truly are our outcomes that we're looking at for our charter schools and our students. Currently, we're working collaboratively as a charter school group, as well as working with the National Association of Charter School Authorizers to help guide us in some of that framework. So it's very transparent, not only as far as to our schools, to our community, to our students, also to as us as an authorizer as well around what those particular metrics are, which we would then provide that information to you potentially during a work session, like a just an evaluation for you to be able to take a look at as well too.
So another key consideration regarding the point value of percentage. The percentage right now of points earned on the school performance framework is at 38.9. The next level up for a different performance plan type is improvement, and that's at 42%. So from the state's eyes, in terms of that holistic way of looking at a school performance, based on that data with growth and achievement, they're looking at 42 being that next category. So you'll see that in reference to some of the documents where they talk about moving to an improvement or performance plan. Correct. The point value that's being referenced is what's the point value on the school performance framework, which includes both growth and achievement data. It's the state scoring system by which they measure all of our schools for accountability purposes, and it includes the achievement on math, ELA, and science, and the growth on math and ELA. So that's how you earn points, and so that's the point value that we're talking. So yeah, currently Hope is 38.9%. That puts him in the priority improvement category. Yes. $42.
Well, I definitely agree with Director Chancho Shaw's suggestions that we also need to look at the other matrix to look at whether, when we look at Hope's renewal process, currently, state of Colorado has 40 online schools. 7 of them are just like Hope's, which is a multi-district online charter school, and 21 of them are multi-district online school, and the rest of them are single district online school. But Hope is the only one that has one division that's 8 years in performance rating. So there's a couple things I'm asking. One, have we did an employee survey about Hope's? There's a website called glassdoor.com. The employee give feedback about a particular company. Currently, Hope's rating is 2.1 out of 5. And the last 5 rating of them in 2018 are all 1 star or 2 star. So we look at them, it's not good, the employee that work for them. So, but then of course, that may not be absolutely, reflecting of that. But by the way, DCSD has a pretty good rating right now. It used to be bad also. So is there any way we can objectively measure the employees' satisfactions? And the second thing is, during the last school board meeting, we were so about the parent satisfactions level. I would like to see it and to see how does the surveys method is based on, because a lot of the presentations, they said that I love to go to school, and that seems to be what I saw during the summary. But knowing that Hope's is not actually a traditional school, a lot of times they spend a lot of times during the time is doing online learning and things like that. So I want to know how the question is being asked, how many people was the survey sample, and I would like to see that myself, so we can gauge what's the parents' satisfaction level of Hope's. So employee, parent, and also, if it's possible, can we compare Hope's with the other multi-district online school, or to see what is their what do they do better than the other one, or what can we learn from the other school? And again, after all, there's 29 of those right now, or 40 in the state of Colorado, right? So we can learn from each other and see how we can improve Hope's based on the other people, performance. That's the third things that I think I would like, to see. And do we survey the school district where Hope is currently in and see whether Hope is truly contributing a value that the current school district they operate in is actually cannot duplicate, and we will. I mean, I as a small business owner, when I see whether my business is viable or not, I always want to see how does I compare with my competitor. And that's what I want to see. Thank you.
When you look at the idea of teacher satisfaction, I think one of the big things that I looked at as a principal was looking at teacher retention. I think was a big part that I would constantly look at is my survey. If my staff was unhappy, I would probably see a large teacher turnover rate that was there. If you look at Hope on average, their mentors was about 69% retention rate for the mentors, and on average it was about 80% as a staff in general. That was there. So if you look at the staff satisfaction side of things, those are the two numbers that I think you would see in general. Was mentors was 69%, on average as a whole staff it was 80%. As far as the survey, I definitely would turn that over to, I think, Hope to be able to speak to that. I do know that a researcher from DU was at the core developing that particular survey. I couldn't speak to some of those exact details, but I know Heather and her team could do that as well. But I do know that was a component that was built into that piece. As far as looking at other school districts and making comparisons, I think the one thing that I've tried to process in looking at the validity of the data is, are you measuring the same thing with the same environment, same students? So I think some of the challenge that I would have to be able to make the direct correlation to say that this online is servicing in another way, if it's a different population and potentially different needs, what I would hate to do is make a leap. What I do know we can particularly say is are we servicing the population at the levels that we would want to? I think that's the area in particular that I know we need to grow in very specifically. And so could we look at how other schools are potentially doing it to get some ideas and get some feedback? Absolutely. To be able to make the direct connection and correlation to say that this school district is servicing it better than ours when there's a different population and potentially different needs, I'd hate to make that leap. But I would absolutely agree that you can see over an 8 years worth of a period of time in our elementary with Hope that that they have not served us at the academic levels that I think Hope would like to see, and for sure what Douglas County wouldn't want to see either. Did you do TEL survey? Oh, you can. Never mind. Matt will.
So yeah, I can address that question. In the most recent version of the TLCC, they had 45% of their staff participate at the elementary level. And again, that threshold is 50%. So unless you hit that 50% threshold, we don't have access to that data. Middle and high school was also under that 50% threshold as well.
I just wanted to echo what Danny said about as a cautionary on the multi-district online piece and the other online schools, is that just my experience in having been around for a while, as these multi-district onlines have come along and changed over time, I think it is important to note that they service students in a variety of ways, and we've seen inconsistencies kind of in the models that are at different multi-district online. So while I certainly agree that we should be looking at success stories and promising practices at those, at many of those that would be helpful in our support of Hope, that we should do that, but just caution that it's really not an apples to apples, as we've discovered across those schools.
Matt, I'm wondering, as they're having a conversation in the state board around measurements from the assessment, the growth, and the achievement versus just achievement, since that hasn't yet been decided, do you have a prediction about how that would impact Hope if it were just achievement?
Wonderful question. I don't necessarily have a crystal ball to see what they're projecting in terms of how the scoring system would work. Currently at the elementary school, the percentage is 60% growth versus 40% achievement. And so you can get a ratio of growth versus achievement. And so it depends on how they pick that ratio on what the impact would be. If it's solely based on achievement data, that would have a ripple effect across all of our schools in terms of how that would look. Based on the historical performance of that school, achievement is the lower of the two categories, growth versus achievement. So you would see that go down if it was strictly just achievement. But they have not made a formal decision on that yet. Oh, yes, it would impact all of us. And yes.
You would have schools that are high in growth but low in achievement, and then conversely, you would have high achieving schools but very low in growth. I think we need to make sure we continue to fight where there is a balance between the two.
I guess my question is, because they're at the 8th year, and we're in that weird kind of, so it's the 8th year and now they're making this determination. Will that have an impact on our decision, or?
And the thing that should have the biggest impact on our decision should be, obviously we're in the 8th year, and there should be continuous growth, and we should expect all of our schools to be in the improvement or performance category. The thing that impacts us in my perspective, and I was attempting to articulate this earlier, was the findings by the state. The state simply said, we're going to give you until 2019 for your schools, your elementary and middle schools, to be in priority improvement or the turnaround plan. The middle school is there, the high school is there, and it looks like the elementary school is at 3.1. Our problem is that we have the years off when we look at the renewal, and that's why Danny and our team recommended a renewal that would equal that of the state, because the state is going to look back at this plan in 2019. And if I'm not mistaken, we will have additional test scores in the fall. And the expectation is that for the elementary school to make up that 3.1 points, and hopefully it will be it will be into improvement or performance, and then they would have met the guidelines stipulated by the state, and our renewal will match the state's.
The last part I want to just be able to add to this piece is the shift we want to be able to make, I think, as we continue to keep moving in. I would say every one of our charter schools would say this, is you want to be a high quality charter school that's serving the unique needs of your population. Hope is a different population than what we would traditionally see, I think, in some of our charter contracts that we've seen that are there. The other aspect is that doesn't disqualify the fact of trying to ensure that our students are performing at the levels we'd want to be able to see them. So from us, an accountability factor. The challenge I would say is we no longer can say, hey, just do this. We want to see, again, are those things having the impact that we want? And I think a system that we're trying to work on in particular is to ensure that we're not waiting until the fall to know how well our students are doing. And that's that shift that we have to be able to make, is making sure from an accountability standpoint, we're not waiting until September to get those results to say how well we did. If we're doing it well, we're getting that information in real time and ensuring there's high quality professional development to support mentors to provide that direct instruction that's there. And that's the direct communication that we've been having, I think, with Hope, and I think that's also Hope's aspirations as well when you look at some of their plan too.
And to Director Long's point and other board members' point, and I will certainly concur, in 8 or 9 years, our students should be at the metric that we want them to be. They should be in performance or improvement. And I think with the additional items that Danny's put in place and our conversations with Hope, that this will be the year that our elementary school there in Hope Online will meet one of those two benchmarks. With that being said, Danny, you're right. The demographics are different, and there is a recognition of that. In our conversation with State Superintendent Anthus, they are looking, it's a question that Director Long asked, what about other online schools? What about other schools with similar demographics? The state is looking, as well as our district, Douglas County School District, we are looking at school districts, whether they be online or brick and mortar schools that have similar demographics. And it's our expectation that in this 2019 year that's specified by the Colorado Department of Education, that Hope does meet that at both elementary, middle, and high school. Because again, there are schools with similar demographics that are getting close or meeting the steps that are specified by the Colorado Department of Education.
So from a context, to go back to the why 2 years for Director Long, just to really clarify that piece, if we're giving this direct feedback to Hope in December or January, the ability to try to implement systems to ensure those things can happen is something that I also want to make sure that there's a realistic time frame to reestablish systems to make those changes that are specifically needed. I think too often the Band-Aid approach will only last for so long, and we don't need to have this conversation that if we made the growth in 1 year, then we're back at it again, and then the following year, it doesn't make it any better. The goal for us is to see the sustained growth. I think that's there. So the insurance of giving this type of feedback is to look at sustained growth rather than, great, we made it 1 year and we're back having this conversation the following year after that because we're not there. So that's really the intent and the aspirations, is to say look at it from a 2 year period so they can realistically develop some structures for that.
So just to sum up too, I think in executive session we may want to get clarification because we have some competing statutes. One is we've got a directive from the state board that says you have till 2019, and then we have statute that says that if a school is on a priority improvement plan, there is reason to revoke its charter if I think it's 5 years or something like that. So I think in executive session we probably want to get clarity on what trumps what, in terms of that. So I'll just kind of bookmark that for a moment. Any other questions though specific to Hope?
How does the rating of Hope impact the Douglas County School District rating?
So as an independent school within our county, within our district, their rating does not have an impact on us overall because in order to generate a district level rating, we look at aggregate student data. So their individual rating does not impact us in terms of our district accreditation type. Oh, I do want to make mention that next year accountability rules have changed. They will change going into 19. So if they do earn an improvement or performance plan, they're technically on hold. And so they have to perform for 2 years, which goes back to Danny's point that if you do it for 1 year, you're just on hold. You have to perform 2 years, and that's a new law that was passed in the last legislative session.
Okay, so we move on to the next school, which was Northstar Academy. And again, just entertain if there's any questions or further information that we needed from Northstar.
So just do we review their budget, or does our department review their budget thoroughly? There's no concerns that you all saw with their budget. I just want to be really clear on that because we've gotten a couple of comments about it. And you're good with it. Thank you.
And Danny, maybe you could further expand on that. I think I don't know that we have a hyperlink that takes us to the budget or not. Maybe we do, maybe I missed it, but if you could just, for any of our charter schools, how is there a way for us to hone in on their budget? I think specifically looking at itemization in terms of how much administration's cost versus staff.
The document that we provided was the fiscal health document provided from the district that's also audited by CDE. The part that we wanted to look at from truly a financial management fiscal health aspect is really looking at those main categories. The idea of getting into operationally how they're spending those dollars, that's where it becomes kind of that autonomy piece, kind of that how they're spending those dollars is something that is kind of that balance. If it's something that is drastically off, that is there. And the hard part when I say drastic, I'd probably refer to Scott Smith to be able to identify what that looks like. But in the sense of what a school is held accountable by the state of Colorado, that audit is what we use. And there's a link when you click, if you look at fiscal management review, there's a link that takes you straight to that, which then highlights if you're in the green or the yellow, that's the good thing. Green is the ideal, yellow, there's a reason why, red is where you don't want to be. But in all of our renewals that we had this year, they were all pretty much in the green that was there. But we utilized that because we wanted to have a second layer, that lens on the financial health, that we didn't want it just to be an authoriser's viewpoint. It's what they had to also then submit to the state for review as well. So that's why we use that as as kind of our guide.
And again, Mary, I think just a bookmark for us possibly in executive session is to get clarity on statute. I think there's some specific wording about us in terms of how we oversight. And so I understand Danny's response that we use CDE's audit for that purpose, but I think we'll want to maybe go more in depth to really understand if that meets the responsibility that statute sets out for us. Anything else on Northstar? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the last charter that we looked at was STEM. Questions regarding STEM?
I think we all know that STEM has a very good testing score and things like that. But I think consistently there's a concern about their governance model, and it has been a pretty consistent theme. Even when they do come over to review in 2014, the board at that time imposed some conditions related to their governance and the way that they treat their parents. In this year, we hear the same concern after 4 or 5 years. So there's a couple questions that I would like to get some clarifications. One, when they first submit for review in 2009, we passed a very specific, they submitted a very specific bylaw about how many parents they're going to get elected versus how many people is going to get appointed. But after that, subsequently, they change it and they just give notifications to the board. So my question is, so once we approve a contract, is there any way that we can make sure that they fulfill the initial contract conditions that we pass? Because, I mean, you recommend for them to do a conditional renewal for 5 years. So from the previous experience that we have in the past, I mean, after things is getting renewed, things has changed, and we have no control and no say on any of those. You just need to inform us. So I think there's a lot of parents over there, I mean, especially the one that email us, is the voice of the parents are not being heard as a result, because they used to have 5 board members, 2 is being elected by the school. And after that, subsequently, none of the parents is being elected, and they have an interview process and things like that. Some parents' feedback to me is that it seems like it's an Iranian style of elections, which means that you get no say. So, so I want to know what kind of legal ramifications that we have if bylaw has been changed during the durations of contract renewal. And second, can we as a board enforce a rule during the renewal and said that you have to have number of seats in your governing board is being elected?
Sorry, there's a slight line we don't want to cross when we're asking for legal counsel specifically. And I think your question, Director Lung, is around the lines of can they change their contractual agreement after the fact that we've approved it. And I'd like to bookmark that for exec session because I think it crosses that into that zone of legal advice. Is that fair? All right.
Yeah, I'll answer kind of a part to that as well. Was going to make the same comment, I think, as well. The other aspect when you talk about parents potentially having a voice in the process, one of the conditions that we had established within the charter renewal contract was actually adopting a parent complaint and communication policy and incorporating their website and publications. Results of this policy would be shared to the Choice Programming Office to adopt and develop yearly goals. So the part that I would say is not only do we not only want to, which STEM has now developed a complaint process, so which steps do you go through? The other part is how do we then share that as a school district so we can support and develop goals around some of the concerns if we're hearing consistent concerns that are there. That would then be a part that they would have to share that information with us directly so we can see a pattern. If there is a pattern of concerns that are there, it's a little bit easier to see rather than isolated incidents that we're piecing together over a 5-year, if it was a 5-year contract that they just went through.
Kind of related to that, Danny, I know that we had an attachment on the survey that they had conducted on parent satisfaction. It's a couple of years old, number one, and number two, the attachments that we received wasn't very clear. They're pretty microscopic graphs, so I think there would be a desire for us to have a closer picture or a big, so we can read it. The other question I have of you, though, is in terms of satisfaction, like you had mentioned, is that an expectation that charters annually ask for parent and employee satisfaction?
So we'll make a note to make sure you get a more legible copy of this survey that is there for you. We're making a note of that right now. The other part is our charter schools consistently ask for that parent survey. That's year from year in, year out, especially with the model of what enrollment looks like to get that regular feedback. It is a part of the process in the charter school application that you do provide that information as well in the renewal. The other aspect when we're looking at that yearly renewal framework that is there, that is built into as a recommendation. We haven't formally adopted that framework, but it is a part of that yearly framework where we're not looking at as trying to look at things in a 5-year lens. We can be able to look at a year to year over a 5-year lens to get that regular information and feedback that is there, where you would then be able to see yearly reports, in particular around performance and specifically around parent satisfaction.
If we have a data point that might contribute to our question, for instance, STEM did meet the parameters for the TLCC survey in terms of they went over the 50% mark, so their results are reported. If we have that additional data point that causes us to pause a little bit, how does that work? Should we interject that concern for staff? And I don't know if staff looked at that, but for instance, I'm looking at the school leadership category on the TLCC. STEM only received about a 58% favorability percentage, and really 80% of their staff had been surveyed or participated in the survey. So I don't know, as in this process, can we interject those kind of data points to staff to say, can we take a look at that?
I think as we evaluate different data points that are there specifically around parent feedback, as well as teacher feedback, community feedback, I think we're looking at a variety of different survey components. The idea of utilizing it as the only tool, I think, in that idea, just like I think we've talked about here, I don't think you'd probably use it in isolation. I think can it be something that we provide as an example of different ways of getting feedback from your staff? A lot of our charters currently get that survey data just around, getting that feedback from their staff, but obviously who's collecting it can have an impact as far as what that looks like as well. Want to add anything?
think you made a great point. That's just one piece of data that we're looking at district-wide. I would imagine that each of our schools would use another piece of data to garner not only parent satisfaction, but student and staff satisfaction as well. So I wouldn't use this one piece of data as the defining, I guess, reputation or relationship that a particular staff member may or may not have with the student body or parents.
Yeah, yeah.
And certainly, I'm not recommending that we use only one piece of data, but I think you can see where I think the directors are concerned is that you've got 2-year-old data for parent satisfaction where there's only probably maybe 133 participants in that survey that's 2 years old. We have another data point that indicates that there's some concern around employee satisfaction. So unless we're missing something, I mean, if there's other data points, absolutely, we will certainly entertain those.
Yeah. Okay.
Was this on the same topic or was this a follow-up?
No, it's a follow-up. Same topic. So my clarification is, just like we talked about in a previous conversation, one data point is that's not the question really for me. The question is in a body of evidence, and when any data point comes across, so in one case it may be student assessment, in one case it may be parent surveys, when there's a question, when that's called into question, how do then we have any capacity to support or resolve any of those pauses we have in our thinking around those data points?
Oh, Danny responds and then back to Wendy.
So I think there's a couple of parts, and I think the point I want to pull out is, can we make some of those specific recommendations as we're doing our charter school renewal application? Can we pull out those specific points and ensure those are visible within the application? Answer is absolutely, that's there. The other part in this process is ensuring that, again, we will give direct feedback on the governance side of things. I think it really fits in that particular category. Also around governance in the sense of looking at what type of culture and climate that you're developing, I think, as well too. And we can start pulling out some specific data points. We're also going to be very transparent, and the hope is, what was a little bit of a shift this year, is to be able to make this a two-way street, meaning that it can't just be a school providing this information. We also want to ensure we're giving feedback to the schools as well too, which our leaders, I think, have really welcomed that idea of the feedback. Our hope is to be as very transparent. We had a one-on-one meeting with each of our charters and renewal process to actually go through the specific data. We need to make sure we're calling out specific concerns that are there and ensuring that we're having those very transparent conversations, that we're not waiting to year 5. I think that's probably more my concern, is we can't wait from 2009 to 2014 to 2018 to be able to have those conversations, is we have to have a medium to be able to have those direct conversations that are there. Having some of the parent complaint components that are there, do we need to look at an employee relations? That's where it becomes a challenge, because when you start looking at the charter school agreement and what employee relations looks like, that steps a little bit outside of our privy to be able to give that feedback to them, is the challenge in some of that. However, can we give some feedback in relationship to it from an overall governance side of things? Absolutely, but if we start jumping the employee relations side of things, it is a limitation that we do have and how the statute established. Yeah. Okay.
So I have a different question, but I don't know if anybody else had a follow-up to any of those before I kind of change the topic. Everybody good? We have certainly heard quite a bit lately about special education at STEM. And my question is staff satisfied with how students with special needs are being serviced and how interventions are going?
I think the formal feedback about any specific concerns that STEM has had in meeting the needs of students, I know there's been a thorough process to review that, and we've gotten some findings back that has said that they've done their due diligence to be able to support. The other aspect that I would say in this work, and I would even own this just as a leader of a building as well, the work we need to continually to do around our multi-tiered systems of support in general, around looking at this work, is a significant part of the work we have as a district. And I don't want to speak for you, but I know we've had some of that conversation as well. But it's an area that I would say collectively, I think the challenge in some of this work is usually when things tend to fall apart in the special education side of things is we haven't done a good process leading up to it. I think that's where the prevention model really comes into play, where I would say every one of our schools, in my opinion, can continue to evolve our practices that are there. Have there been direct conversations specifically with STEM or out concerns about meeting the needs of individual students? That was a part of our feedback that we had in our coaching conversation we had in particular. The idea of looking at, are there any major violations around that? And that's been brought to us from a legal standpoint. We have had that chance to vet that information, get feedback from Mary on that as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to speak to at all about that, but it is something I can tell you. We had a very direct conversation about how are you servicing all students. In particular, is there an ability for them to continue to grow in their multi-tiered systems of support from K-12 programming? Absolutely, just like I would say any one of our schools says that we need that. But I know there have been some specific concerns that were pulled out over the last couple of years that I have caught in on the back end, but had those direct conversations as well. Do you want to add anything, Mary?
I think that there have been some issues, but in preference to wanting to preserve confidentiality of any specific student issues which might arise, that might be best preserved for responding to legal questions in executive session.
Danny, could you clarify? I know at one time with a new charter, it was required that that the district special education staff staffed that school for at least a year. And then once there was satisfaction that that school was staffing appropriately for special needs students, then we allowed that shift. Can you just clarify, I know there was some mention of a liaison from the district that was consulting with STEM around special education and how needs were being met. I'm just curious, what is that relationship in terms of how we audit whether or not special education services are being met?
Comment that was made by Kristen was the reason why that went away is could we really service it at that scale is the reason why that initially, as far as went away. I don't have any more context to that piece. As far as the direct connection between how we service, we have special education coordinators for each of our region defined to each one of those schools. So our coordinators are directly working with each of our charter schools, where we're actually building in a process where I'm actually building in on a monthly basis, meeting with our charter coordinators from each of our regions to get more of that direct feedback. I was supposed to have my first one this morning. I got to admit I had to reschedule it. But one of the things that we needed to close that loop is how do we get that direct information back to us in a timely way of what is going on, what do we need to be able to provide, whether it be through our charter school leader meeting during district leadership time. Do we need to bring in special education to be a part of that conversation where they already have been this year in particular? But that getting that real-time feedback is something that we saw as a loop that needed to be able to close, where again, it can't be something that our charter school coordinators were working in isolation with charters and we weren't aware of it as a systems level. Are we ensuring that we are providing the same level of service in each of our region, in each of our schools in particular? And that's where there was that shift in how we programmed from a special education standpoint as a district, where there's a coordinator that's now attached to particular feeders. And so that's something that we're making adjustment at the same breath as well. We also have a yearly compliance plan that we have each of our schools sign off on as well in relationship to services they need to be able to provide. Good question.
This is kind of a follow-up to that, and I suspect it's probably going to be an executive session issue, but my question would be, is there a systemic issue with special education services at the school that put us at risk for liability that needs to be looked at? And I don't know if that's something that we need to reserve for executive session, or if that's something that can be talked about publicly.
I am not aware of any systemic issues. I mean, I can speak generally to the issues of, generally speaking, charter schools that are authorized by a school district are subject to being a part of the local education agency, which is the Douglas County School District in this instance. And our special education support team supports those folks to ensure that they're complying with their responsibilities. So it is my understanding that we work in partnership with our charter schools to monitor their implementation of IEPs, and that's why we have directors and coordinators. Now, I am relatively new to this district, but I'm familiar with the process in other jurisdictions, and typically it's a partnership establishment so that you can see and have assurances that the Douglas County School District can be assured that the charter schools are complying with their responsibilities. So that would be, it is my understanding that that is how it is implemented here in Douglas County. That is why we have our coordinators participating and sometimes other folks participating in our IEP meetings to assure that each individual student has an IEP that is aligned to their individualized needs. And the processes, the assurances for parent participation in IEP meetings is assured as a result of parent notifications going out in the same manner that they're going out for all of our other special ed eligible students.
So just to follow up to the follow-up is that our special education coordinator that's assigned to STEM hasn't indicated any concern with regards to the systemic approach around STEM being in compliance with what's required for special education.
I am not aware of any systemic concerns regarding STEM or any one of our charter schools, but I've said this on multiple occasions, starting from the interview process. Each one of our students who is eligible for an IEP under IDEA, those rights are reserved for students of any types of schools, whether it's a charter school, magnet school, neighborhood school, or what have you, as our in-house attorney, Mary Clemens, has just stated. I would encourage parents, as I've said on multiple occasions, if there are concerns regarding their student's IEP or a request for testing, please contact Nancy Ingalls in our personalized learning department. If those questions and concerns are not addressed fully there, please contact me directly in my office. And again, I'm not aware of any systemic issues regarding IEPs. I've heard of some anonymous situations, and I ask parents to please come forward with any concerns they have at any one of our 91 schools if parents feel as if their students are not being properly served.
The other part to that, Dr. Ray, is to ensure that we don't let it get to that level is the reason why we built those regular meeting times. I think that's probably been more my concern is I think by the time it gets known to us, then it's, I hate to say it, it's already, sometimes it's hard to crowd back in and ensure there's the right step. So the hope was to be proactive and develop those regular times to get that regular feedback to ensure that we can involve ourselves in a way that can support the process to ensure we're meeting the needs of that student. So that's why there was a little bit of shift in that practice.
Okay, seeing none. So I think at this point, we can see that we do have some issues that need to be discussed in executive session. Legal issues where we need to hold a conference with the board's legal counsel to receive legal advice on specific legal questions pursuant to CRS 24.6 4024B. Specifically around this renewal process and our legal parameters. We do have a quorum of board members, and so we need a 2/3 affirmative vote to move into executive session. Is there a motion that we move into executive session? Moved by Holtzman. Is there a second? second by Graziano. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. Director Graziano, Lung, Holtzman, Lemieux, Vogel, Ray, I, and Chancho Shore. Okay, we will be moving into executive session. Audience, thank you for being here with us as well. And thank you all staff members who were here and participated. We appreciate that.